Hello, and welcome to Behave, the podcast with Dr. Tamsin Astor, your Chief Habit Scientist, international speaker, and author. Today, I have the most fabulous guest, my friend and colleague, Ann, who comes also from Cleveland. Yay. Thank you for joining me, Ann.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's so fabulous. Oh my gosh, look at you with your lovely lipstick and earrings. You look wonderful today.
When the mood strikes, I've got like 7 of these lipsticks over here. So I just, throw them on. I feel like I'm putting on my badge of honor, like ready
to go.
you know?
I love it. Yeah, particularly at this time of year with the pandemic. Like I was talking to a friend about how, like, one of the advantages of working from home is you don't have to wear pants, but one of the disadvantages of working from home is that you don't have to wear pants. Right? Like how this like almost 1 year has changed our behavior. Yeah. So this podcast is really all about behavior, and I'm really interested in talking to people about the behavior that they support their clients with, the behavior that they feel like really changes their lives, because I want my listeners to really come away with some useful, tangible tools about behaviors, whether it's like mindset behaviors, mindset tools, mind shift tools, or whether it's behaviors in terms of like how they navigate boundaries or how they navigate their relationships. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about your story and how you came to coaching, because I feel like coaching is one of those really interesting areas of supporting behavior in others, which is more tangible almost than being a therapist. Right.
Yeah.
My father is a Jungian analyst. And, as a therapist, it's much less of like, try this behavior out, and more of like supporting and hearing and holding space for. And I think that one of the things that was interesting to me stepping into a role of coaching was like, try this behavior and report back to me.
Yeah. I think for me, it's that I've been a certified nurse midwife, licensed as a midwife for since 2008. And, I think we always used to joke that we were life coaches who knew how to catch babies, use speculums, do breast exams, but at the basis of it, we were really life coaches. And there's a lot of truth there. And so when I myself was going through a struggle that I was experiencing in healthcare and just feeling burnt out, um, and really starting to wonder where I was supposed to be, just feeling that out of alignment with what I wanted, and not knowing what that was. I just knew I was very stuck in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And so having gone through that space and using a coach, I don't think I knew what coaching was. I just thought like, oh, that sounds super cool. Like that's kind of what I do. And I love sports and I love, teams, and I'm not a huge proponent and fan of management. However, I love the element of working with people and with teams. I do. And so I was just like, oh, that sounds super cool. And I like goals, and, I'm an achiever and all that shit. And I just loved it. And then when I got in, I started to understand and have these very appreciable changes in what I was doing and my thoughts and my beliefs, and starting to really dismantle many of the beliefs that I had about who I was, what I was good at, what I was capable of doing, what my purpose was, why I'm put on this earth, things that that are somewhat heavy, and I think symptoms of many of a space that many of us go through. And whether we label it as a midlife crisis or we just label it as like a, like loss of identity or whatever it is. I mean, I just knew I was going through it. And so when I started in this coaching program and started working with a coach, I found it to be so useful to have that connection and safe space, and someone who could just be the sounding board and who could provide, illumination of some patterns that weren't serving me, and behaviors and habits that really weren't helping me be my best and that were contributing to how I was feeling. And so I think for me, coaching, it provided that opportunity for change. And I think that's what one of the things that for me is so important is the idea of when I work with clients, it's that mindset shift of I'm stuck. I don't know what I want, to I know with absolute 100% clarity who I am, what I bring to the table,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore this is how I show up, and this is the life I choose to create,
Yeah.
not this is the life I put up with.
Right. So it sounds to me that one of the things that going through being coached helped you illuminate was which behaviors you were doing or not doing, which tied into your bigger, vision or mission, like what it was that you were here to do, what you enjoyed, what kind of parent you wanted to be, what kind of wife you wanted to be, what kind of friend you wanted to be, what kind of, effect you wanted to have on the world. And thus what behaviors, would contribute, what habits, what daily actions would contribute to fitting with that bigger piece, and that having that space, being given the opportunity. Because I think a lot of the time, we get so busy, we stop to look at the bigger picture, right? We're just so in the day to day that we stop and fail to stop and take a moment and go, hang on, like, why am I doing this way? Like, what does this mean for who I am and the kind of person I want to be in the world, right?
Yeah, and I said, and when we were talking, and when I wrote down, some of the questions you asked me before our conversation, like, I hate to behave. I don't like to be told what to do. I don't. I appreciate rules and hierarchies and structures that serve in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and I still sometimes despise them, right? And so, one of the things that I think is so interesting is that when I look and consider as a midwife, as a woman, as a mom, as a coach, if I were behaving, I wouldn't have the life that I created right now.
So it sounds to me, when you hear the word behave, it sounds to me like you think of it as being like rein it in, control yourself, conform, fit inside the box. Sort of, it's interesting that, I mean, like, I always start my talks about habit science where I say, the definition of habit is negative, right? It's things that you can't stop and things you can't change and things that are stuck, right? And I'm always like, let's flip the switch on that and see, like, let's take the science of habit and create the habits we want and change the habits that aren't serving us. And that's really interesting to me. And I'm going to dig away at this more as I interview more people for this podcast. But I think it's really interesting that for you, the word behave feels like being contained, almost like doing what you're supposed to do rather than what you really fucking want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like I look at it from the lens of habits help me get where I want to go, right? They provide systems and opportunities to help me move along in the direction of my dreams or where I want to go, right? I think of like what I use in terms of just the that you helped me set up actually, or you helped me to consider in terms of like when I get up in the morning, right? Like having my cues and having my action and incorporating rewards, like that to me feels really good. And I think super juicy and I love it. And when I interpret or hear behave, I am just like, fuck that. Like I'm not
Kind of
here to
like,
behave
right.
because to me it feels like it's behaving in somebody else's
Right, like a
system.
teacher, like behave, follow my rules, right?
It's somebody else's, it's the rules for somebody else's table. And what I've seen over, my journey in terms of exiting clinical practice and building a business for me, and has been this journey of there wasn't when I think of like, the saying of like, if there's no seat at the table, like, build your own table. And I feel like that's kind of, for me, in my humble opinion, when I behave, I sit at the table of someone
Mm,
else's game, someone else's rules. And I
mm,
don't like
mm,
that because I don't like to be told what to do. I
mhm.
want to do it the way I want to do it. I don't care how it turns out, what it looks like, if it's bad, if it's shit, if the lipstick is terrible, the color is just off 1,000. I don't care as much about that. I care as much that I got to, exhibit my own sort of self-control to be like, I'm going to try the lipstick. The
Yeah.
hell with it if it's purple. And I have yellow and undertones in my skin. And so therefore I ought only to wear the colors that highlight my skin the best. The hell with that. If I like a purpley toned plum, I'm
Yeah.
going to wear a purpley toned plum lipstick.
Yeah, baby. I love it. So when you think about behavior with the people that you support, like, what is the behavior that that your clients, which tend to be women, right, tend to be nurses or people transitioning out of nursing, what is the behavior that for them is the kind of like they have that kind of come to Jesus moment and they think, okay, like this is a behavior that I have to implement, that I have to get rid of, that I have to somehow create in my life. And that's when I reach out to Anne.
There's two. It's usually when the behavior is a pattern of thinking that gets them stuck in overwhelm and in like in no action. They just are very stuck. And so many of my clients tend to be, oh, they'll say, you know, I don't know what I want. I just know this isn't it, because they are just in that space of like, I don't know. I'm just stuck in this like constant shit show, and in essence of feeling like it's not for me. I'm not, you know, I'm not in alignment. I don't have the clarity. And so that's one piece of it. And then I think the second piece is just ownership. And it's kind of like, it's a little bit maybe of empowerment, though empowerment, I tread lightly with that word because I feel like we're only disempowered by our own thoughts. Like no one can disempower us. Do you know what I mean? Like and so when I think of empowering someone with work related to mindset, I think I'm supporting you with the tools to help you take a very critical look at what patterns are serving you and what aren't, and whether overwhelm of thought is useful to you or if it's not, and whether or not you are exerting control in the areas of your life where you have control, well, to a degree, right? Or if you're busy trying to exert control in areas of your life where you have no control. And therefore you're producing, you know, a lot of stuckness and overwhelm and frustration and all that. So those tend to be the two things that that clients tend to seek me out for, and that I support them with, is that move and mindset of, okay, let's examine this from a almost an objective standpoint, develop that key self-awareness, and then start to just say, okay, like, where do I have control? Where do I not have control? And how do I move forward in a way that feels to me like it is powerful?
So, I mean, it's interesting. So it sounds like part of it is the clarity piece, right? Because I think that what's really interesting when, you know, super busy, super powerful, you know, super engaged people get stuck, it's often that they've got too much on their plate and they haven't created the systems to support them, or they haven't done that kind of stop, pause, reflect, and they've got so much stuff on their plate that they don't actually need to have, and that they can delegate, delete, get rid of, you know, sort of remove from their lives completely, right? And so I think what's interesting about what you're saying is that you are helping them, you're giving them permission to stop, right? Which I think a lot of the times we don't. We're like, that's a waste of time, you know. And I find myself doing that a little bit sometimes with meditation, because the effects of meditation for me are much more subtle than, like, if I don't exercise that day, or I don't, you know, eat food that serves my body, right? The effects are much more high level and subtle. So it usually takes me a couple of days of not meditating to be like, oh crap, you know,
Right.
like,
You mean you can't appreciate when your telomeres are expanding in
yeah,
size? Like, right? Yeah. Right.
You know, right. And so it's interesting that, so what, like that sort of that process of kind of being able to stop and overthink, because I think, you know, it's interesting when I think about what you're saying is like the lens of behaviors being the sort of restrictive, constricted, like, you know, fit the mold thing, is that I feel particularly for us women, we are often pushed to, like, the, you know, like I talk about it in my book, like the shoulds, right? Like we should on ourselves, like this is how it should be done. This is how you should feel. You should want to follow through on this. You know, you should enjoy this. You should make the cupcakes from scratch for your kids' birthday, whatever the hell it is that we're like,
You should behave.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's all of a sudden, and then you're playing in somebody else's game. Yeah. So and I think too, it's very, we do a very systematic exploration, so to speak, of beliefs and belief systems, and which ones we choose to keep and which ones we find that they can be, you know, blown up with multiple sticks of dynamite and, you know, and torn down because they just don't serve us. And they have provided maybe some utility in the past, and now, you know, they don't serve us in the way that we, you know, in terms of achieving the results that we want.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, I think the big message I'm hearing from you, which I love, is that, you know, you need to create your own table, you need to create your own rules, and that you don't need to follow what everybody else has done. And that part of that is figuring out what feels good, right? And that part of like the sort of like the resisting the behave model is like, just because that's the way it's been done in the past, that's the way I was taught to do it, that's the way my mother modeled it for me, so my sister does it, and that maybe they're fine with that. That doesn't freaking mean that I need to follow that and live in that way. And that part of this whole thing is that it's build your own table, right? It's make your own space. I love that. That's really, I was doing a Peloton ride this morning. I just got a Peloton, and that she was doing this one with this whole theme from Shonda Rhimes, The Year of Yes. And one of the big things she was talking about was like, if you know, like if you are shamed into minimizing yourself, if you are in a space where people make you feel like you have to dim your light, you know, behave less than, be smaller than, be whatever it is, like anything where you feel like you have to, you know, minimize and reduce yourself, you know, leave the room and find somewhere else. And it was funny because she said, and I'm like, you know, new to Peloton, so like I'm still getting like the sore ass when I ride on it, and I'm like still figuring out those like pointy tight shoes, you know, and like, you know, how to like make sure everything's right, and that I'm like hearting the right songs that make my Peloton playlist on my phone and all that shit. And I'm like listening away, and she goes, you know, if you're in a space that you feel minimized, that you don't feel like you can be yourself, leave and find another one. And I, as she said it, I was shouting at my screen going, no, create your own one. Don't join someone else's, create your own damn space, which is basically what you're saying, which is like, you don't have to fit into any of the molds that are out there. Create your own fucking mold.
Yeah, you can. And I think, you know, and even sometimes I think we get hooked into this. It'll be better when I'm in a different job. It'll be better when I have a different boss. It'll be better when I have a better support staff in my clinic to see it run. And that, right, is, you know, there are elements of that where there is some truth that a team can really make or break, right? How smoothly a clinic runs, or how many patients get seen on time. And I use the medical metaphors because that's what's most familiar to me. But in the same vein, right, if we don't acknowledge our responsibility in creating that scenario, right where we are, not in 2 jobs from now, not in our last job, not in this, right? Like the dream, so to speak, can be now. And that, right. And it doesn't take, right. That's where I think it's kind of like, you know, by building your own table, I think it means like build your own set of rules that allow you to be the best version of yourself, regardless of where you are. There will always be people around you who seem to, you know, make it more challenging, who seem to have a more challenging time with life. There will always be some who have a wonderfully, you know, perceptively easy time with life.
Yeah.
And the reality is none of it's neither good nor bad. None of it matters unless you give it that weight, right? And find kind of that, you know, your perception of it. Well, this one is good, and so I ought to do this one, and I should do this. So I keep coming back to, you know, regardless of the situation, I support my clients and my own coaching that I do on the day-to-day basis, because I do this so often for myself. If I wait for external circumstances to provide me with the degree of satisfaction and joy and appreciation and gratitude that I want in my own life, I give my power over to something else. And I no longer am agreeable to doing that. I decline to give my power over to somebody else. At my table, I take responsibility. At my table, I set up healthy habits. At my table, I have a positive outlook, and I consider all of my feelings and all of my thoughts and all of my beliefs, regardless of where I am. And that's the beauty. Like, you at your own table, you could pack it up. You could, you know, it could be a picnic table. You could pop it up at the park. You can pop it up at the playground. You can catch your kids on it. You could be like, kids, come sit on the table. And then you could tell them, get off of my table. You're no longer welcome in my. I mean, you know, so, but that's the beauty. Once you start to understand building your own table, I think it becomes much easier to go into any situation and say, oh yeah, let me make it happen.
I love it. I love it. That's such a good takeaway. I love that. Ah, that's so juicy. Okay, so I've got 3 questions that I ask all of my guests. And I want you to give like the most honest answers here. So the first is, what is one behavior that you always struggle with, no matter how much coaching, therapy, support you get with this?
Oh God, overeating. I mean, I love to eat. I love the experience of eating, and I love food so much. I love chocolate and wine, and I love salty sweet combinations. I love food, and I love community and experience. And I work on a day-to-day basis on overeating and reminding myself of my intuitive self that knows when I'm full. And that has been a struggle for me over many, many years. So,
Hmm. And so what is a practice that you found to be most helpful with that, whether it's a mindset or a practical one?
so for me, it's being aware that, right, I
Mhm,
have to have self-awareness to say,
mhm,
I choose to overeat
mhm.
often or sometimes, right? And so when and if I have those thoughts, like I engage in overeating, I feel kind of terrible about myself, and then I have shame and guilt, and then I just get into a death spiral of doom and gloom. That doesn't serve me. So the next step that I take is to say, I create foods, I welcome foods into my body that help me to know when I'm full. I choose the right food at the right time for how full or hungry I feel. The food that I choose fills me in a way that will help me to acknowledge when I am feeling satiated.
Okay.
It's just coming back to the thoughts so that I then establish that belief system that
Super
I'm.
mindful. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's just that I understand, I'm someone who I pay attention to how full I feel,
Yeah.
I take these steps kind of a thing. So,
I love it. That's really helpful. Okay. So the second question is, what is your favorite quotation?
oh, there's so many. Oh, I'm looking around. Wait, I probably have something up in my office.
Do you have anything that relates to behavior, about like following the rules or not following the rules, or like, breaking the rules, or
I have to think about that. I don't know. I would say it's probably one. Wait, I've got it on my sheet. It's probably one of Byron Katie's, but
Mhm.
and she says something to the likes of, I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to just summarize. She says something to the results of, right, your degree of suffering is in direct relation to how much you disagree with reality.
Oh God, yes. Ah,
Right.
right.
So, right. So if you're like, if you think that you ought to behave and you ought to have it ought to be this way. And right, your perception as it should have been, the expectations are high and it's not, like it's just suffering. It's just inviting more suffering into
Yeah,
your life. And so
yeah,
that's my current one that it's on heavy repeat for me. Cause I'm like, okay, choose suffering or decline suffering, your choice.
yeah,
Which
yeah,
would
yeah. Right. It's about making that choice. Exactly. Like I'm in a group that we're doing the artist's way over a year rather than over 12 weeks. And somebody made this, we were talking about boundaries yesterday, and in our monthly call, and somebody said this comment, which I loved, which is like, I choose not to pick up the rock that you're giving me. Right? Which is like that. It's like here, like, I want to throw this on you. I want to project this on you. I want you to, and it's like, no, like, I'm not going to accept that. Thanks. That's yours. So it's the power of choice, right? And which I think all of this comes down to. I love it. Okay. So my third and final question, and this is one of my most fun questions. If you had a theme song that played when you entered the room, Anne, what would it be?
Oh my God. Panic at the Disco, High Hopes.
Yay!
Like 1,000%. It would be on like heavy, it's always on heavy repeat. When I need a song, a go-to where I'm like, man, I'm having a tough run right now and I need a little bit of like a
That's it.
little like kick in the ass. I go
Awesome.
right to that one because it drives me like I feel it. Like I feel it in my body,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
ah.
I love it. I love it. Well, hopefully this summer or maybe 2022, if they come to Cleveland, we can go see them and scream at
Oh,
that loud,
yes.
right? Let's do that. Let's
Yes.
manifest them coming to Cleveland, right?
Yes. Come to Cleveland. Come to Cleveland. Yes. Yes. We'll travel for Panic at the Disco. I'll
Right,
just
right. We could go to Columbus. We could go to Pittsburgh, Detroit. Yep, I'm down for that too. Let's do it. Let's do it. Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to share about behavior that you think is pertinent to this?
I think it's just to show ourselves grace with it, in terms of, number one, some of the feelings that we feel regarding if we behave or if we don't, or if we have good behaviors or bad behaviors. And then I think, so number one's that self-compassion piece. And I think number two, the second is, right, they're only good and bad if we choose, right? Again, going back to this piece, like if we choose to judge them, right? It's a bad behavior if I judge it as such. It's a good behavior if I judge it as such, and I get to choose if I'm going to place that lens of judgment on it. Or I can just say, it's just a behavior.
Yeah.
It's just this thing I did one time, and fucked if I know.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Anne. And I know you've got a freebie that we'll put in the show notes too, that will be available for everybody. And I'm also going to put a link to your song because that's fucking awesome. And thank you so much for being my friend and showing up so consistently for your clients and your family. And I'm so glad to know you.
The feeling is mutual, Dr. Astor, Chief Habit Scientist.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you.